Life's a book, don't get stuck on sad pages. Rainy days with no money. Hard work lead to days that are sunny. Looking back, it was all needed. The problems, the pain, the trauma, the grieving. You are now tuned in to the prisoner to painter. Prisoner to painter. Hard work, dedication. Rainy days, inspiration. Prisoner to painter. And now, a word from your local Pope dealer.
Almost there.
No, I know.
And we are live.
Perfect. Welcome to the Prisoner to Painter podcast. I'm Nathan McDermott.
And I'm Katie
And
McDermott.
today joining us is Hakim Crampton.
Salute. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for having the courage to tell your story. We get a little snippets here or there from social media and people that know you. So it is crazy to think that you went through all that and you still do not hate. Like that's something. That's inspirational in itself. If there was nothing else to talk about, that's inspiring.
So we received the advice to kind of ask in the beginning because we were waiting till the end to do it. Do you mind telling us who you are, a little about what you do?
Yeah, sure. And once again, thanks for having me on. Congratulations on the launch of your podcast, Prisoner to Painter. It's a great platform for people, for our community. I'm a child of Jackson for the most part, even though I've lived in other places and other cities in different parts of my life. I'm from a different era of Jackson's history. The breakdance era, the graffiti era, the b-boy era, and so that's where the formative years of my life pretty much began for me, as an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid coming of age in the hip hop era, the late 70s, early 80s. Coming from a background of having a very popular, well-known father in the city who was, a hustler, who was selling marijuana back then, and used his marijuana proceeds to start a real estate business, a booming real estate business. He bought the whole block. When people talk about buying the block, like that's what he did. He bought the block on the whole corner of Mason and Blackstone. So if you see that empty corner on Mason and Blackstone, that was my father's whole block. It's empty right now, but it was his whole block. And, being inspired by him to see the things that he was doing in community really helped shape who I ultimately became. Now, sadly, for me and my generation, we got caught up in the mid-'80s crack era, which, for those that didn't live it, that only hear about it, it's hard to comprehend what happened to us. It's hard to comprehend how young kids would be proselytized, so to speak, by the allure of the streets, and find themselves making a decision as children to join the streets, to get out there and sell illegal narcotics, to pick up firearms. And so that became who I became as a kid, even though it's not who I should have been. It's not who I could have been, but it became who I became. And that helped shape my childhood, shaped my upbringing. Because hip hop, like I used to tell people, one day we were breakdancing. The next summer we were selling crack. And it's hard to reconcile how that could be. How did that happen to a group of kids who was, excited through music and beatboxing and spray painting graffiti and was traveling the city with cardboard dancing one summer, for several summers. And the next summer, we were on the street corner with crack cocaine and firearms, So that shaped my 80s upbringing. And being a person in that situation, I found myself in and out of juvenile custody, which ultimately then led to me as a 17-year-old being caught with a firearm and being charged as an adult in Lansing. I got locked up in Lansing, did some time there. And my mother was like, we got to get you better help. This ain't who your life's supposed to be. So my mother worked with my sister and then moved me to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was supposed to be starting fresh. I was 17, turning 18 in 1991. And it was a real opportunity for me to start over. So while I was in Milwaukee, I was kind of focused on starting over. I had enrolled in a GED program at Milwaukee Area Technical College and was attending classes, had a job for the first time at Ponderosa in Milwaukee. And, was supposed to be starting fresh. And for those that know a little bit of background on my story, that's not what happened for me. I went to the liquor store on November 5th, 1991. Went to re-up on some more beer, late at night with my friends. And I got into a little conflict with another young man, 18 years old, looked just like me, ended up meeting him later in life in prison. And we got in a fight. And that fight led to me being locked up. And when I got locked up, they never even questioned me about the fight that I got into with this young man. Mm-hmm. They only questioned me about an unsolved murder that happened 3 weeks prior to that day, which I had no knowledge of. None of us had any knowledge of it. But they separated us into interrogation rooms and began playing the game of your friends confessed to something that they didn't even have no knowledge of. They told them I confessed as well. Mm-hmm. But I didn't believe them. I thought it was a game because, for one, what they confessing about something that I wasn't present at. It didn't make no sense to me. Yeah. So they was able to convince a young man named Mark Henry. He was 19 years old. They convinced him that I confessed and said he did it. Yeah. So he signed a statement saying, no, he did it, basically, is what happened. Mm-hmm. And they charged us, me and my friend Joe Robinson. They charged with first-degree murder, took us to court, used him to testify against us, and we were found guilty. And that was really the beginning of my life, the life that I live today, because at that moment, it allowed me the opportunity to really reconcile what my childhood was like. How did I go from breakdancing and selling crack to in prison for a crime I didn't commit? Mm-hmm. And more importantly, though, what was I going to do with my life once I got out from under this? Because I knew one day I was going to get free. I just didn't know when, how, how it was going to manifest. And it took 15 years. So in the midst of those 15 years, I was focused on me. Yep. I was focused on what I needed to do to become the person that I need to be for my community when I return home to my community. So I thoroughly educated myself, read lots of books, wrote lots of books. I taught in prison. Okay. I worked in the education department. I worked in the vocational department, at every prison I was in, essentially. So I got a chance to really educate, learn the skills and the techniques it really takes to teach and educate. And then my own self-education really allowed me to build a backdrop for my own understanding and knowledge. And then that really helped me develop a perspective about what was taking place in the 80s, how that unfolded, and what led up to that, sociologically and politically from the beginning of America up till that moment, right? Because I'm born in the generation that was supposed to be the first group of African Americans to experience freedom, to experience the opportunity, to experience Dr. King's dream. And we didn't get a chance to experience that. We found something else. And it was a big challenge for us. And that challenge for me now was to understand in perspective so that I could come home to my community and be a voice of lived experience, a voice of knowledge and understanding, and really help the next generation of kids, like I say, avoid the pitfalls and the cracks in our sidewalks that I slipped through, because there wasn't no one like that for me, So that's pretty much the backdrop to me, and how I got to this place. While I was in prison, I created what's called Amen for Youth, the Academic Mentoring Education Network. I built that right at a prison table. Me and a couple of friends, we all got together and said, you know what? When we get out, we're going to do something for our community. So we sat down in the room and we just started writing, building out our programs, what it was going to be. And each of us that did that are actually out in our community doing phenomenal things.
So one of my huge things is, and I love this because I pretty much every of my guests that are black or of color, I bring up I always ask about racism because it's so prevalent, and I like getting connected because me on the other side of things, I've seen it being white and both of us right in front of the judge for the same crime. I get probation and he doesn't. So I thank you for touching on that. One of our huge things is so you said about your path in your childhood. We just like to dig a little deeper. So what was your favorite cereal?
You know what? I was one of the kids that when we went to Kellogg to tour as kids in school, I was the kid that asked the question, "Can I mix them?" And they was like, "Huh?" It was like, "Yeah, I guess." Because most people like a certain type of cereal. I never liked just one type of cereal. Okay. I liked to mix them all up, So I got my bag and I put 5, 6, 7 different types a cereal in there, and I still do that to this day. I mix cereal to this very day. You know, Wheaties was a good cereal to me for some reason. Probably, you know, Wheaties and cornflakes, probably because really we couldn't afford all of the sugary brands at a certain time. And so, you know, having little basic stuff like, you know, cornflakes and, you know, Rice Krispies. And that's probably why I used to mix them too, because it was kind of bland a little bit, but I would mix them and pour a lot of sugar in them, you know, to make it a little more flavorful, you know. So I never really had a real favorite cereal. I like to mix them all up to get the taste of all of them, you know.
Man. So speaking of the crack epidemic, or however you want to word it, well, yeah, epidemic, whatever, fucking killer. When it moved in, just like over a summer, how would you explain that? Like to somebody, like you said, if you weren't there, you don't understand. What's the best way to explain it to try to make us understand?
You know, it's really like an impending storm that, you know, you don't really know the tornado was really coming. And next thing you know, it's over your house. And the winds, the rain, it's there. And that's how it really was for me. I was in the 6th grade at Hunt School, and I was already selling marijuana. You know, I wasn't like into selling marijuana, but I had made my first marijuana sale at Hunt School, you know, technically. And I wasn't really aware of crack at the time. And that was 1984, 85. And all of a sudden, that next year, which was my 7th grade year at Parkside, one of my childhood friends got shot, you know, and it was my best friend's big brother, right? He got shot. He was the first kid in Jackson to be shot by other kids. Now, these were Parkside kids, you know. 2 of the kids were 10th graders. The rest of them were 8th and 9th graders, right? And when that happened, it was like a wake-up call. Like, you know, we as children, our lives could be in danger. We could get killed, you know. And the crack was the centerfold of it all. You know, people were out in the streets now hustling. So we was ill prepared, totally ill prepared for the consequences of it. Law enforcement was ill prepared. Our parents was ill prepared. And because no one was really prepared for it, we suffered the most because we were blamed for it. And we were just kids. You know, how can you blame children who were 12 and 13 years old for a criminal enterprise of a drug epidemic impacting their lives? So police blamed us. So they violated our rights. They used to just see us walking down the street, see us with a baseball hat on, and they used to pull us over and search us, which is violating our rights, violating our right to privacy. And some of us had drugs, some of us had money in our pocket, some of us didn't. But our lives never changed from that point onward. We were so conscientious of who we were as people at that time that whenever we would be in a vehicle, we would drive down the street and see a police officer, we would take off our baseball hat because the baseball hat told the police that they're a drug dealer. You know what I mean? And so we lived cognizant and conscious now that we were on the opposite side of the police, you know, and so we didn't know what to do. We were kids. We didn't have the knowledge. We didn't have the brain development to think about how we're supposed to really react to this. They say crime didn't pay. Well, the drug dealers had money. So it just didn't, our brains weren't able to evaluate that, you know?
So how was your family dynamic growing up? Like, what did family look like for you?
Yeah, you know, I come from a great, phenomenal mother who used to always tell me that she understood what I was going through, but I just didn't believe her. I seen my mother as a parent, a loving, caring parent who went to work every day. I didn't see her as understanding what had now happened to me with, you know, the drug epidemic coming and me being attracted to it, me wanting to be out there in the streets. I didn't think she understood that. But my mother, trying to hide her past from me, didn't tell me about her past. She actually understood. My mother and my father, in their late teens and 20s, all throughout their 20s, they lived in Detroit in the Linwood Dexter neighborhood, which is the historic neighborhood of the YBI, the Young Boys Incorporated. Before the YBIs really emerged, they lived in that neighborhood. And my father was a heroin dealer, and he was a pimp. And they called my father Pimpin' Sam because he was known as a pimp. So I grew up with my mother having left that world, but not having made me privy to it. And my father continuing his lifestyle, still hustling. And so I was kind of caught in between two worlds. Didn't know how to reconcile that because my mother wasn't transparent with me about what she experienced in Detroit. My mother was arrested and she hid that from me. You know what I mean? She was arrested for running my dad's brothel, right? His prostitution house. She didn't reveal that to me. I had to overhear that as a 12, 13-year-old kid, overhearing it from other people who knew my mother's past. So I was unable to really reconcile this great parenting that I was receiving from home, this great guidance that I was receiving from home, and being confused about what I was seeing from my father's lifestyle and what was happening at the same time, the crack epidemic, and I was attracted to the streets. So I was kind of caught up, confused, and didn't really know which direction to go. But I was pulled heavily into the streets. So my mother was my first advocate. She was the one that was constantly there supporting me as I was getting in trouble, helping me try to, figure out how to, make it, through this process that I was going through. So, my family home was a nice structure, to be honest with you. We lived in poverty. My father was hustling, but, it's not like that my father was taking care of us. We weren't living with my dad. I spent most of my time with him. I spent a lot of time with my father, but it wasn't his direct responsibility to take care of my mother and me and my brother. You know what I mean? It wasn't his direct responsibility per se. And he was a present father in my life. He was never absent, was always present, and had great guidance for me as well. He didn't like the fact that I was in the streets. He just, like my mother, no one was prepared for the crack epidemic. It was something that had never been seen before.
So other than the drug epidemic that was happening, would you say that you had a pretty good childhood at home?
Yeah. I had a great childhood at home. We moved into the Shahans when they first built, 1982. We was some of the first families that lived in the Shahan when they was brand spanking new, when the Mormon Drive side wasn't even built yet. It was still, the woods were about to be torn down. They started to put buildings up there. And, like I said, grew up in the breakdance era, the graffiti era. It was fun times. People got in a fight, they would fight and be friends the next day. I had a great upbringing, I really did. And it wasn't, like I said, until crack really hit. It wasn't until that 6th, 7th grade year for me, between 85 and 86, that everything changed. And it changed instantly. And it was almost like there was no going back. It was like I couldn't find my way back to the goodness, to the good upbringing that existed in our community at that time. Jackson forever changed, and it has not returned back to what Jackson used to be.
This is why I really love interviewing and getting people's story, because like me, not from here, and also clearly other reasons, I would never know, nor would I ever find out if I wasn't doing this. So really, thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart. And secondly, living in Jackson for this whole time, how was the youth home? How was your first couple stays at the youth home, and how do you think law enforcement has changed from then till now?
Well, for one, I shouldn't even have been prosecuted as an 11-year-old child for throwing a rock on recess, is what I did. I started off throwing acorns, thumping acorns at my classmates, is how it started. And as I had already thumped acorns on the classmates directly in front of me, we was walking from the gym back to our classroom. And so our teacher decided to take us outside on the recess yard and walk us around. And after I had thumped all the acorns and hit the kids in front of me, the little acorns were light, so they didn't travel that far. So I picked up some little pebbles and started throwing pebbles, tossing pebbles, hitting kids and acting like it wasn't me. You know what I mean? I was just a child, immature child. And just so happened that one of those pebbles I threw actually hit my teacher, and thankfully she didn't get seriously hurt. I'm sure it hurt, of course, getting hit with a rock. It was a small pebble, so I'm glad it was just a small pebble and wasn't like a brick or a big rock. But they decided to prosecute an 11-year-old child. And I was locked up after going to trial and being found guilty. 2 of my classmates testified against me. And
that's crazy. That is just insane.
It's insane.
That is insane.
And they recommended that I start doing my time right there and then that day. Because they said if he starts his time right now, which is like on a Tuesday or Wednesday, go through this week and go through next week and gets out on the following Sunday, then it eliminate how many weekends he'll have to do afterwards. So they made me be locked up right away for like 10, 11, 12 straight days and then come back and do 10 weekends. And that was the most difficult thing for me as a child to be taken from my mother as just an 11-year-old kid. And when I remember when I got out, I came back to the shade hand, got out on a Sunday, and it was raining that day. And everyone was in their houses, like there was no one outside. And I just felt lost.
Yeah.
I felt totally lost as I went through the projects, you know, looking to hang out and play. You know, I had missed so much playtime, just 11.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most hardest times for me. But then I went back the next weekend and back the next weekend and back the next weekend for 10 weekends. And every weekend I went, I got kind of indoctrinated into the carceral system, to being locked up. Started having more conversations with some of the older kids, was making connections with the older kids. And so by the time I finished my last weekend, when I got out that last weekend, I didn't go play in the shade hand projects anymore. I went out to the streets where other things were happening, other connections I had made in the youth center were now taking place. The crack epidemic was heavy. So I was already now, you know, harmed in a different way than they realized. There was no lesson that was taught to me. You know, I learned a negative lesson by going to the youth center. And so it was just a difficult time, a trying time, a challenging time. And it prepped me for incarceration, which I shouldn't have been.
Yeah. That's absolutely insane. To send an 11, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, that's detention, slap on the wrist, that is anything.
Especially for a non-intentional act.
Yeah.
Like there was no intention for me to harm my teacher. You know, there was no intention for me to do so.
So I mean, so you said you kind of had you know, like in and out, kind of get in trouble here or there. So you moved to so you moved to Wisconsin, and so what that charge, when that happens, can you just explain that time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Before I went to Milwaukee, I went to Lansing.
Okay.
I went to Lansing in 1989 as an 11th grader. And my mother thought that moving me to Lansing would be a better place. Thought Lansing is the, you know, the capital, the colleges, you know. We didn't know that there was any bad neighborhoods in Lansing. My mother, you know, was kind of gullible about what Lansing was really like. I got to Lansing and found Lansing to be a bigger crack neighborhood than Jackson.
Okay.
And so, you know, I got really deep into the crack epidemic at that time, selling dope on the streets. On the west side of Lansing and on the south side of Lansing.
And I really, just interject real quick, I really think that speaks to your mom's character very heavy. Like, there's a problem. Let's try to get out. That's very nice. That's nice.
And that speaks to why I came back to Michigan and came back home to my community, because I had been running from it for far too long. You know, so we ran to Lansing, and I got in worse trouble in Lansing. I got in some of the worst stages of my own mental health. Really took place in Lansing, where children shouldn't be thinking about harming other people. But I was a kid that already picked up guns as a 12-year-old here in Jackson because my friend got shot. So I thought that, hey, I need a gun because I could be shot too. So I always kept a firearm on me from 12 on up.
Wow.
So I moved to Lansing at the age of 15, turning 16. And experiencing Lansing was a lot different. It was a lot more violent, a lot more gunplay, a lot more drugs, a lot more money in the streets. So that made people like me who were trapped in that cycle much more vicious. So my mind had slipped into a state to where I was willing to harm people with firearms, with guns. And I injured a lot of people with guns. I shot a lot of people. I pistol whipped a lot of people. I shot up a lot of houses. You know, before we were really using the terminology drive-by shootings, I was already doing those things. And Lansing became a worse place for me mentally and emotionally than I had ever experienced before. So I got caught with a firearm en route to actually go do some very devious dirt in the streets, me and one of my childhood friends, Vern. And we got caught. We got intercepted by the police, and we got caught with firearms. And I took a plea. I took a plea for the gun I got caught with, hoping that it would, you know, save me from having to go do 2 years in prison. So I took the plea, and I got sentenced to 4 months in county jail. And I got in multiple fights in the county jail. And my probation officer came to see me and said, you know what, the judge is going to violate you and send you to prison. He's calling for resentencing of you. Because evidently you're not learning your lesson. You sit through 4 months and then get out and start probation, and you're already, you know, violating probation in jail. So she said, the only thing I can think to help you is if you find another place to go, out of state, and we put you on the interstate,
Dang.
and we won't have to worry about you no more.
Okay.
So that's what led me to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, start fresh. Was only there 2.5 months. In all actuality, almost 3 months before I got arrested. And my sister had lived there. She had grown up there. We had the same father. She was born in the South, where my father was from, and they migrated from the South to Milwaukee in the early 70s.
Okay.
And so it really was an opportunity for me to start over.
Mm-hmm.
But because I still had characteristic traits that I hadn't dealt with, like my substance use of drinking.
Okay.
Right? I was drinking heavily. I drank every single day. So I was technically an alcoholic, right? Even though people don't really want to admit where they're at in their substance use disorder. Yep. But if I'm a child of 16, 17, 18 years old drinking every single day, I had a real serious substance use problem, and that was with alcohol. And I smoked weed a lot. And so that is the moment that the alcohol and I collided, because I haven't had a drink since then, November 5th, 1991. I have not had a drink since then. So our collision with me being arrested for something I didn't do really reshaped who I became, shaped who I am today. So as I said, I was, arrested, falsely accused, wrongly convicted, and sent to serve 45 years in prison. Now, my mother was focusing on getting me home through the courts, through legal representation. And I supported that, but I was more focused on me. Mm-hmm. I was extremely focused on me. So I did all the things I was supposed to do while I was there. I educated myself, graduated, started educating others, writing books. I wrote, I used to say I wrote over 15 books, but I actually wrote way more than 15 books. I still have all my manuscripts to this day. So I wrote a little over 20 books, about 22 books while I was in prison. Okay. And that allowed me to be a strong voice inside the prison system, because nobody inside the prison system had met anyone who was there, had written that many books, who was that educated, that intelligent, that articulate, and had the power and influence to shape what was happening inside the prison system. I was one of anybody, so any of the so-called gang leaders who had power and influence in prison, no, I wasn't in the gang. I had that same kind of power and influence amongst the Muslim group that I associated with, right? So between myself and any of the other individual so-called gang leaders, we had real power to change and shape people's lives. Yeah. You know what I mean? To influence their lives for the good or for the bad, depending on where you was at. I was focused on the good. So I used that good while I was locked up to really impact the prison system. So I've been out 19 years, but the impact I had is still felt inside the prison system right now to this day. So it was a great opportunity for me to change the direction for my life and to prepare myself to come home to my community.
So you said you served about 15 years. What did an average day look like for you? And then how did you end up successfully getting out of prison? Yeah.
So an average day was like this for me, really. People who used to walk past my cell used to look at my cell and be like, man, you got a village. Because my cell, I literally turned into a college campus room. Like I was like literally in college, though I wasn't technically in college. So I really, I used to have any given time, 100, 120 books in my room. I stopped going to the yard for 4 full years. From 1994 to 1998, I didn't go to the yard. Not because, I didn't want to go be involved in athleticism or anything like that. I just walk and talk. I was really focused on me. So every single day I woke up reading a book, studying a book, typing a book. You know what I mean? I taught in the chapel twice a week, right? So I was really building a new life for myself, really building a new opportunity for myself. Then they transfer me out of state. They transfer all of the powerful, influential individuals to a private prison in Oklahoma in 1998. And that's where there was really a greater opportunity for me to even teach more, because it was a private prison. They weren't as focused on security like the Department of Corrections is. So I went to the deputy warden and security director and asked them. I said, hey, there's an empty school wing over there at the gym, classrooms, and nobody's using. Can I get them? Like, it was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm going to teach classes. I'm going to literally take those 2 classrooms and turn it into a college class. And so I grabbed up about 3 or 4 individuals that was also smart, educated, intelligent, and capable, and assigned them opportunities to be instructors.
Right.
And together we built an entire school, you know, in the prison system. And we taught various courses, oratory, the art of public speaking. We taught religious class. We taught finance. We taught English. Like, we literally taught. We had our own class. We used to have people used to come in and just listen to our lectures. And that's actually what shut it down, was that we opened it up to anybody in the prison system. And we used to have blankets in there because we used to pray, you know, during our class sessions. So some young men came in there and cuffed our blankets and used them to attempt to escape, to put them over the wire, over the fence to escape. And they traced them back to our classroom. So they shut our classroom down. But yeah, so that's what it was like for me. It was really focused on education, teaching, impacting other people's lives. You know, I was a focal point in the chapel. So people who went to segregation, for example, I made sure that we sent them packages of material, reading material, because you in segregation, you ain't got nothing to read. But through the chapel and services, you could send people religious material. So I kept a roster, a list of people who I knew. Every time somebody went to segregation, I write their name down, go to the chapel the next day or whatever day I was scheduled to be there, and say, hey, can you photocopy this and send it to someone so they're in segregation? I wanted to make sure that people got an opportunity while they were in isolation, where, you know, it's hard to be isolated. So ultimately what happened was this. In the about the 10th or 11th year of incarceration, I was in Oklahoma in a private prison, and Reuben Hurricane Carter's organization. If you've seen the movie Hurricane that Denzel Washington played, Hurricane, the prize fighter from Patterson, New Jersey, went to prison for murder he didn't do, got his conviction overturned and got out. He went to Canada when he got out in the 80s, and he started an organization called the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted. His organization heard about my case because my mother was constantly advocating for me. So she had wrote an organization in Patterson, New Jersey called Centurion Ministries. They were an organization that focused on the wrongly convicted. Well, they knew after reading everything about my case that this man is innocent. So they took the case and handed it off to Reuben Hurricane Carter's organization in Canada. They went through the case and said, yeah, this man needs to be free. So they called the state of Wisconsin, where I was locked up at, where I was in Oklahoma, but that's where my case was from. And they called the Wisconsin Innocence Project and said, hey, there's an individual that we believe is innocent. We're asking that you take the case on our behalf. And at the time, they had already had me on file because I had already requested their help and support in the 90s. And they said, they turned me down then and said, you haven't served enough time right now because we're focused on people who's been locked up for 20, 30 years, who's innocent as well. So we're going to focus more so on them because they've been locked up a long time. And at this time, I hadn't been locked up 2, 3, 4 years. And they was like, we got people in front of you, so we got to need to prioritize those who've been suffering longer than you. Yeah. So by the time they got my case, 10, 11 years had went by, and they assigned 2 law students to my case, and I was in Oklahoma. So they couldn't get to me. You know, we talk on the phone. They couldn't really prepare a defense for my case. So then I got sent back to Wisconsin. By the time I got sent back, those 2 law students had graduated, moved on with their careers, started their law careers or whatever they did. They assigned 2 new ones, but I had to wait another year before the classes got started, the program got reinitiated. So by that time, I had been locked up like 14 years, right? So when they used to come see me, I told them, I said, you know what? I can't wait another 14 years. You know what I mean? I don't know. My mother's getting older. I lost my grandparents, you know, like, I can't wait another 4 years.
That's a long time, man. That's a long time.
It is. So I asked him, I said, would you be willing to meet with the parole chairman? I said, because I know somebody that happens to know somebody. Sometimes it ain't about what you know, it's about who you know. And so I happen to know an individual, phenomenal person who I've been working with throughout the 90s, helped support their nonprofit organization that they started. I had wrote programs for them, helped evaluate their programs and things of that nature. Well, this woman who was executive director, her name is Antonia Drew. Her ex-husband had joined the police force with the then parole chairman. They worked in the same department, had, you know, went through the ranks together. And so this parole chairman was a former Milwaukee police lieutenant that she knew directly. And she said, you know, he's a type of real genuine person that he would be willing to sit down and hear about your case. So I asked my attorneys, would you be willing to meet with the parole chairman on my behalf and explain to them and show them what you've learned about my innocence? And they was like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. That's not their thinking. Their problem solving is litigation. Yeah. We're going to file a motion to brief. We're going to get you free. And they said, okay, we'll meet. So we set the meeting up. My mother was there. My 2 attorneys was there. One of the community activists in the community of Milwaukee was there, you know, who was advocating for my release. And they all met with him together, you know, and he was pretty convinced that, yeah, this man is innocent. He shouldn't be in prison. So my mother told me that he asked her, you know, what you want me to do for your son? And she, you know, she ain't thinking that he's going to be like, you know, let him out, because in order to really merit parole, you have to meet certain standards, right? Certain criteria.
Yeah.
One of those criteria, right, is to accept personal responsibility for the crime in which you've been convicted. Here I am, I'm innocent. Yeah. I can't go to the parole people and say, I'm sorry for the death of this man that I never saw or witnessed in life. I can say I'm sorry about it, but I couldn't take responsibility for it because I didn't have anything to do with it. So she never thought in her wildest dreams that he's going to let me out. Yeah. You know what I mean? So she said, can you at least let him go to minimum security where he can go out on work release, save some money, and ultimately, you know, come home, you know, in the future. And she was like, he was like, you know, she told me, she was like, I tell you what, how about I send him home to you? You know, and so he granted me a parole, and that was in 2006. Okay. And so that's how I got out. I got out on parole in 2006 with a 30-year tail hanging over my head. Remember, I got sentenced to 45 years. Yeah. I served 15. That meant that in 2006, I had 30-year tail over my head. Wisconsin ain't Michigan. No. Michigan, no matter how much time you got tail left, you do 2 years successfully on parole, they know you got a job and housing, you're doing well, they discharge you. Wisconsin doesn't do that. So that means 19 years ago, when I got paroled, I'm still stuck on parole right now to this day. Still have 11 more years left of that 30-year tail. So my life, to a lot of people who don't understand that I'm still in the system, I'm still locked up, right? And still doing the work that I do. So that's another reason why one of the points you made earlier about me not having hate and et cetera, because I could still be locked up. I could still be locked up. So I allow myself not to be bitter, even though I'm disgruntled with the fact that I'm still trapped in the system. I use that as a positive anchor to hold me down, to hold my foundation down, to really launch me and launch my voice, because my voice could be from behind bars right now, but I'm out here free. And so I'm taking that in stride and using it to the best of my ability.
Man, that's insane though. I mean, honestly, that whole first part is that alone can make anybody hate, make anybody, I mean, just turn sour. So, I mean, really, that's impressive. Your first 5 years when you get out, what did it look like?
Yeah. So the first 5 years was phenomenal because I had actually planned and prepared for my release. You know, like I never knew when I was going to get out, but I knew one day was going to happen. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like when my mother told me he was letting me out, everything I had been planning and preparing for was now, I was ready. I was ready. I had already made the inroads to the community. I had already been working with community from prison. I already had a resume. Like I had already built, you know, my opportunity to come home to my community. Awesome. So one of my childhood friends owned a clothing store here in Jackson, still owns it at the mall. Check Me Out Fashion. Yeah, that's my cousin's cousin, right? So we've always been like family. So he had already promised me a job. He wrote the parole board for me. You know, people had already been writing for my release for years. You know what I mean? So when I got out, my mother took me straight to the store and said, he's home. You know what I mean? What's up with that job? He was like, yeah, we come to work Tuesday. So I already had a job. Within 2 months, I had elevated from that job as a retail clerk to a manager. And I was managing out the Lansing location of Check Me Out Fashions. So that put me in a management position within a couple months. And then I used that opportunity, being in a powerful position of a manager of a clothing store, having employees under me. I used that to branch into the community. Yeah. So I started working with the schools, right? I started volunteering at the schools, using my voice as a person, as a manager, of the professional, right? That I had something to share with the kids. Started working with Boys and Girls Club. Then I started an internship program through that same position. I would go to the schools and recruit students because, you know, working in retail is difficult, right? Yeah. It's difficult keeping employees. So I came up with the idea, let me go get some people, train them through an internship program while they earn credits in school, and then give them the opportunity to actually apply for a job and work to earn income. Man. So that was successful. Working with Eastern High School, which is the high school I went to. I had a series of kids who used to come once or twice a week. would learn the skill and trade of retail management, retail sales, and then ultimately earn a job, you know. So that really established me in the community. I was a spoken word poet, and I was a writer as a spoken word poet. I was really a writer, not a performer, right? I was a writer. And so I used that opportunity to go share my story across the state of what happened to me, how I was wrongly convicted. So my poetry was about me being wrongly convicted. So the first 5 years was me really just building an inroad into the community, into the schools, into the juvenile homes, using my voice, using my experience to such an extent that really within the first year of my release, I was in high demand everywhere. In juvenile centers across the state of Michigan, in schools, like I was in high demand in churches. You know, I went to Higby Street Church, the first church I spoke in. Went to Parkside, the first school I spoke in. Jackson High, you know, I was everywhere. Alternative schools, you know, they opened the door for me. And because it was just so happened that now I was at an age where the people I grew up with came into professional positions within the education system. They were assistant principals, teachers, etc. And so they opened the door for me to come into our school system here in JPS. And I'm very grateful for those opportunities that all of them gave me to get into the schools. Because while I was in the schools, while I was in prison, remember, I wrote books. So now they gave me an opportunity to write books for another purpose. So I would work with the classroom, take the work that we did and convert that into a book. So I created 6 textbooks called Slam Lyrical Education, using students' poetry and the pedagogy of me working with them, the capacity for me to pull out of them knowledge, information, poetry, you know, engagement. I turned them into workbooks, textbooks that the teachers could use in the classroom to help engage and improve the literacy of their students. So the first 5 years was ultimately beautiful. And the 5th year was the year my mother passed away. So it was, while it culminated, you know, because the 5 years is a milestone mark, while it culminated in me reaching the pinnacle in my work and in my career, establishing myself, my mother passed away. And I used that pain and purpose to propel me, because like everyone tells me today, man, your mama be so proud of you. And so I continue to work for her pride, continue to work to make her proud in the afterlife, so to speak. And so that's where I stood after the first 5 years. It was a great, great, great role to be on.
If you could do like a step-by-step roadmap for somebody just getting out, getting started, like the second half of their life, like their new journey, what would you tell somebody? Like, mind you, like a lot of people don't have resources, connections, know people. So what's like a rough roadmap that you could tell somebody to?
Well, the first thing I would say right now is I would say go read Shaka Senghor's book, How to Be Free. He just released that book. Great brother, did a lot of time here in the state of Michigan and has been out really leading with his voice and experience in the literary world. And he just wrote a book called How to Be Free, which is kind of like a step-by-step experiential guidebook on how to be free and live free, right? And how to stay free, so to speak. But really, that question is important to speak to what people need to be doing while they're locked up, right? We need to be having this conversation with people that are locked up, because people who are locked up really don't get a chance to prepare themselves for freedom. Unlike me, I knew that one day I was going to be free. So my mind was like, I got to prepare for that. People who are locked up aren't thinking like that. They're thinking about surviving this moment, surviving gladiator school, surviving, you know, my mental health, being, you know, away from family, away from love, away from care, comfort, help, away from, you know, whatever. So we need to be having that kind of conversation in prison. So the first thing that I would be telling individuals is to find the support that you need when it comes to your mental health, because being locked up is going to impact your mental health. So be okay with seeing a therapist. Be okay with having someone to talk to. That's the most important thing. Be okay with that. Don't bottle your feelings up, because if they're bottled up and you don't have an outlet for them, they could explode. And that explosion could be the first step to you either going back to prison, returning back to drugs or other substances, right? And falling off and getting lost, you know? So, you know, be okay with having a therapist. Be okay with having someone to talk to. And then secondly is get involved with community. Find a church, find a mosque, find a group, find an organization, and stay connected to community because it's going to help give you purpose. You need a sense of purpose when you're coming home from incarceration. You need a sense of understanding that you're valuable to the people, to the community, because that's what's stripped away from you when you're locked up. You're nobody. The system treats you like you're nobody, and you're absolutely worthless. And who are you? Who are you to think of yourself as great? You know, you've harmed the community. You're nobody. You're worthless, and that's how the system kind of treats you. But if you realize that you're actually valuable, whether locked up or not, and there's a chance for you to use your value to have an impact in your community, it'll change the state of your being, the quality of your heart and soul, and give you a sense of purpose, right? So find that sense of purpose, you know, and then importantly, what's missing from a lot of people that get locked up is education. Yeah. Take the time to get an education, whether that's inside, which should be foremost, or when you get out, go back to school. You know what I mean? Get an education because that's what's going to help you build your future career. Without that, it's going to be impossible to really navigate life with not an education. As an academic tutor when I was in prison, I was privy to the test scores of adult men who were 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. I got a chance to see that these were high school and middle school dropouts who was reading and doing math at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade reading levels. How can you expect an adult to make it in the world with the 4th and 5th grade reading level, with the 6th grade math level? It's difficult to fit in society like that. So get an education. So those are the 3 main things that I would be recommending for individuals, you know, coming home from any form of separation from society. Even if you were coming home from the military service, for example, be okay with having a therapist, right? Get connected to the community and get an education.
And read yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And read Shaka Senghor's book, How to Be Free.
So I see you've been in quite a bit of interviews. So getting that much publicity when you're out of prison, how did you handle that at first?
Well, you know, it's easy for me because I'm going to be honest with you. I've been famous like all my life, and I don't really feel like I'm famous, so to speak, because I don't really consider, you know, myself to be famous per se. But I've been popular all my life. I used to sit on the right side, you know, of my dad in his Cadillac, who was very famous in the streets, very known, very popular in the streets. The first time I was interviewed on TV, I was about 11 years old. I was Friday's Child of the Week because I was a phenomenal break dancer, phenomenal graffiti artist. And they took notice of that. And I was interviewed on the news. And then I remember as a kid, I called into the radio station. And they asked me a question about the kids, because so much was happening to us as kids. And they asked a question, and I don't remember my exact answer, but I remember I gave a powerful answer about how to help kids. And I remember hearing it on the radio. You know what I mean? I remember, waiting to see if they played my call in, and they did. So I've been kind of in the limelight, in the media, a lot of my life, popular for most of my life. So it never really fazed me that someone would want to stick a microphone in my face and want to talk to me and get perspective from me. I was on the front page of the newspaper from prison. When I got arrested, for example, they put me on the front page of the paper, but I was on the front page of the paper from prison for the work that I was doing in prison. Working to build a council of free people that would support people who are locked up, because we didn't have no rights. And we needed people on the outside to advocate for us. So that was in 1996 and 97. And as a result of me being on the front page of the paper, they locked me up. Said I got too much influence in the prison system, charged me with group resistance and petitions because I was organizing people in prison to advocate for ourselves, to want a better life for us while we were in prison. So, the media and being so-called famous or popular has always followed me from childhood all the way up. So it's real easy for me to manage that. I'm never really nervous, so to speak, to speak to media or to talk, in public.
Well, I'm dealing with the opposite because I have not lightened up. Because really, out of everybody I've had on, it's like everybody knows you, and I believe you're doing probably the most in this community for the less privileged, I guess. Well, even for the more privileged, I mean, I hear your name everywhere, just for the community in general. So I'm still nervous, but you know, you have a lot of story. So I don't want to miss what you're doing now. Do you care to share a little bit with the newspaper and just what else you got?
Yeah. So, you know, I stay involved in a lot of different things, right? You know, Jackson isn't the only place that I had an impact on. You know, I lived in Lansing, lived in Milwaukee. So I kind of work in between all of those places and spaces. You know, my childhood was impacted by all those places. You know, so I technically work out of Lansing for a nonprofit organization as their government relations liaison, working in state government, technically kind of like working with our legislators as a lobbyist. Essentially, I lobby our state reps, our state senators for criminal justice bills, for bills that impact people who are affected by incarceration. But more importantly, the work that we're doing is on behalf of the families of loved ones incarcerated, so that families could be easier for them to know that their loved one who happens to be incarcerated is receiving the support they need while they're locked up. It's not being harmed by solitary confinement, the serious harms that restrictive housing does, psychological harm it does to people. And that families have a right to visit their loved ones, right? Because it's difficult if family can't access their loved ones while they're incarcerated. And it makes it that much more difficult for a loved one who's incarcerated to be rehabilitated or rehabilitate themselves with the kind of love and support that their family can offer them. So that's the work that I primarily do, working with an organization called Citizens for Prison Reform as their government relations liaison, right? The go-between, right, between the organization and the government, our state legislators. Then I do consulting privately with nonprofits, with organizations, with schools, with other entities. I train, I provide insight, I support organizations in building programs. I facilitate a lot of workshops with colleges, you know, with nonprofits. So that makes up a lot of the work that I actually do. You know, you might see me, you know, at a college speaking and presenting. All this year I've been working with MDHHS, you know, training their foster care workers, their CPS workers, training, you know, some of their supervisors, right? Really helping them understand the communities of color that predominate in the CPS, you know, system, right? More Black and Native children are being taken into foster care. And so me having a knowledge and understanding and being rooted in my community, I'm able to help them build a better professional practice as professionals in their field, in their being caseworkers, so to speak, right? And so those are some of the primary things I do. Then locally, of course, here in Jackson, I've always been involved in our education system one way or another. I worked in and out of our schools for about 12, 13, maybe 14 years, working independently. And then I used to work for the Student Advocacy Center of Michigan, which we ran after school programs in our alternative settings here in Jackson. And so what happened in 2018, working with grassroots community organizations, we were meeting one day with JCAC, the Jackson Civil Rights Awareness Association, or Jackson Citizens Advisory Council, I'm sorry. I was thinking of JOC, another organization I used to work with. But Jackson Citizens Advisory Council, we were asking, you know, what can we do for the community right now? What needs to be done? You know, and I thought, you know, I said, well, you know, South Side ain't got no murals on it. We need to liven up the South Side and paint a mural, you know, prominent mural to display, you know, the history, the legacy, you know, the tradition of Jackson. The group was like, that's a phenomenal idea. Let's do it. So we started working on it together, called a team of artists in, and started kind of envisioning, you know, what we're going to do with this mural. And it's funny because the main artist, Joseph Ware, he produced the first rendition of what, you know, the mural was going to look like. And we all was like, nah, bro. Let us help you understand that what we're talking about is community, history, legacy. He was like, oh, I got you. Because he's thinking this from an artist's point of view. You know, he produced a beautiful artistic, you know, representation of what he created was absolutely dope. You know, it really was. But he wasn't seeing the full vision of what we were at with our idea. And once he seen that and understood that, his brain just opened up. He said, oh, Milky Way, Wallace Burgers, our old preschool that I went to, old schools and the King Center, the historical figures and all that just came to fruition. So we built that project up and ultimately was able to put that mural on display on private property. Like if you've seen the Southside mural, it's actually on private property. It's not, the city doesn't own it. It's not the city's, you know what I mean? It's on private property that happens to face the MLK Quality Trail right there across from Hampton's Barbershop. So when we was planning to display that, I come up with the idea, let's have a festival. It's called the Summer Fest because I come from Milwaukee, where Milwaukee had a Summer Fest. So we displayed the Summer Fest. And that's how we displayed the mural. And then that kicked in a vision of mine to say, you know what? This Summerfest opportunity really needs to be an opportunity for community, opportunity for small-based entrepreneurs to launch themselves, to have a place on the South Side where they can set up and display and sell their wares, their goods, connect if they got an organization or whatever the case may be, because we hadn't had that on the South Side. Whenever there was opportunity to come set up a booth or a table, it would literally be at someone else's community. We didn't have that for our community. And so that's where the vision came from, to really give opportunity for community to show up in public. And then as we built the Southside Festival Series up and have been doing it year after year, this year I said to myself, you know what? The money I usually use for marketing purposes, right, to get flyers and posters, I said, why don't I use that money to actually publish a newspaper? Because I had envisioned that the year before when I came in contact with the Chronicle News and said, you know what? So they got the platform that I've been wanting to launch, because I used to publish a magazine years ago when I first came home. I published my own magazine. So when I seen the Chronicle News, I was like, this is what we need in our community. We need our own newspaper that's focused squarely and specifically on community, the business community, the entrepreneur community, that is present and visible wherever you go on the South Side. Not something that we got to go search out to find it, because, it's hard to find, opportunities to really display yourself. So I said, let's partner and launch our own newspaper where we can display the Southside Festival Series and then give opportunity to other small businesses to get themselves out to the reach the community. So that's how the Southside Business Journal came into existence, right? To really be a voice and an opportunity for small businesses like yourself. You to really showcase yourself and get seen in all these different locations that you would normally never be able to be seen at.
Yes, sir.
What would you say that you are working towards bridging the gap between the business community of the South Side with the business community of the rest of Jackson?
Yeah, absolutely. See, the thing about it is this. The poorer communities always seem to drive economy, no matter what, because the poorer communities are the most in need. So that's the reason why we see a plethora of party stores, liquor stores in the poorer communities. That's a lot of money coming out of the poor communities going into alcohol, going into papers and sticks and things of that nature. You know what I mean? Going into this, snacks and whatnot, right? And we need to figure out how to channel the power of that economy. So bridging the gap means that for those corporate businesses, those other entities that exist out there who aren't just focused on exploitation of our community, but really want to connect with the community, really want to build a relationship with our community, the newspaper can serve as that bridge, right? Because, like, for example, if you've seen in the last newspaper, you see some of the advertisers in there, some of the big corporations that are in there. I got a call from Gyro Chiropractic that wants to advertise in the newspaper because she understands that people in the poor community need access to chiropractors, right? And it's hard for her to figure out, how can I reach this population? This is a population that is in need, and I have a service to service them, and I'm unable to reach them. But the Southside Business Journal can reach them, right? So it's the opportunity to really bridge that gap. And really, to take it back, in 2007 and 8, my cousin Deborah Green, who started Happy, helping all people excel, she's the one that really had this vision that I'm riding on right now. It's really, I'm riding on my cousin Deborah Green's vision, to be honest with you. And I always try to say that to make sure it's clear, because she understood that the Southside community doesn't have access to all these nonprofit organizations that get all this money to service the Black community, right? She said, so let's hold them accountable, make them come to the Black community. So we had what was called the Fall Festival in 2007, 2008 at the King Center, where all the nonprofits that got all this money to service our community got called to the King Center and set themselves up and said, okay, here's the Black community, right? And Black community come out and see them because they got resources you need. And that's where the vision really came from. Like, that's how the Southside Festival Series really got its vision, that we can bring all these people together, bridge the gap, bring our communities together on the South Side that is always overlooked, right? So that's how the vision really morphed, you know what I mean?
Yep. So we're getting kind of close to the end, so I just want to give a heads up. Is there any question that I should have asked that I didn't, or is there anything that you want to share?
Well, you know, as we talk about community, people like me who are working in community, you know, one of the most touchy subjects is politics, right? Because politics ultimately has a tremendous effect and impact on what happens to community and in community. And this community, particularly the community that I come from, the most disadvantaged community, has suffered a long time at the hands of political neglect. We only pretty much had, you know, two people that really represented us. Elnora Mormon, who was our first elected African-American city commissioner, which is now the city council, and Carl Breeding. And they were the only two that really had been advocating to make sure that the South Side had what it needed to thrive. And since then, unfortunately, we just haven't seen the continuation of that kind of real fight for our community. And that's very hurtful to me. And I try to stay out of politics because it's a dirty game. Mm-hmm. But what I've been witnessing over the last 15 years is the taking advantage of our community by outside influences who can use the fact that our community is impoverished and can help push their agenda at the real expense of us. And so the Black community has been heavily gentrified by an agenda that really doesn't serve us. So I myself at this particular time am not in good graces politically with our political entities. I'm not in good graces with them at all. And I'm saying that because I wouldn't be authentic to my voice if I didn't get a chance to really highlight that one of the reasons why I do what I do is to assure that our community really gets what it really deserves. Yes, sir. And we're currently not getting what we deserve or what's happening on the South Side right now. There's a bigger agenda that is really going to push us out of our community. While we think it's going to benefit us, it's really not going to benefit us. It's really going to push us away from our community. And we're going to lose tremendously in the next 10 years. We're going to have suffered a great loss if we don't really get more involved, if our grassroots organizations don't get more involved, if we don't lay our stake in our community and start rebuilding our own community for ourselves. You know what I mean? Because there's nothing wrong with being from a community and helping support and build your community up. And I think that that's where a lot of people are failing to understand that we can't rely on government. We can't rely on the politicians. They got agendas, people that money them, that support them to make sure that their agenda is pushed, right? And we're going to have to step outside of that as a community and really get grassroots involved and start building our own economy up and taking back our community, you know, from politicians, so to speak. So it's difficult to kind of have that conversation, especially when, you know, we have some Black elected officials, you know, and but that don't mean that our current Black elected officials are really serving our best interests, right? While they may serve a certain interest, it don't mean they're serving our best interests. Yes, and so politics is hard for me. Politics is very, very difficult for me right now because I see, you know, I have, while I was locked up, I got a chance to study politics. I got a chance to educate myself historically, something that a lot of us out here in society haven't done. Yeah. Because we don't have the time to sit up and pick up books and study and read the impacts of what's happening historically and how things, agendas are pushed and what will happen as a result of those outcomes. And whereas I did, so I see it from a whole different point of view. So I hold a lot of strong positions politically, you know, in our community, and it causes me to butt heads with certain individuals in our community, and so it's hard to have that conversation, but sometimes those hard conversations are the most important ones to have.
So, thank you. What is your definition of success?
The definition of success for me would be being happy and content where you are in life. Well, not necessarily where you are in life, but being happy and content within, right? And using that as a means to do better, right? And if you're in a place in life where you're inspired to do better, that in itself is success. That you reached a place to where you desire better for yourself. That's success right there.
Yes, sir. Okay.
If younger you and older you met, would you get along with younger you and vice versa?
Yeah, I really would, because the thing about me growing up as a kid, I was able to connect with everybody. Everybody was able to connect with me. While I got lost in the streets, I still had levels of respect. I'm from a generation where we respected our elders.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone like me came to me, I would have listened to them. I might not have heeded because I might have already been lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would have listened to them. And I would show them the respect and recognize them as someone worthy of respect.
If you could use one word to sum up your entire journey from where you started to where you are now, even where you think you will end up, what would the one word be? It has to be one word.
Miraculous.
Miraculous. All right. This week, because of how much you do, we wanted to double down. So we got you 2 gift cards. One from Robin's Roost.
Okay.
They serve food and
Not on Sundays. My cousin Wendy actually owns the business. So
Which restaurant?
it is the Robin's Roost.
Where
It
that's
is
at?
next to the Roxy Cafe on West
Okay.
Ave.
Okay, I ain't ate in there.
and then from your neighbor.
Okay. Yeah, that's what's up. Appreciate that.
So, but yeah, she does not do food on Sundays.
Yeah,
But
Just figured we doubled
that's
down.
good. I appreciate that. I'm
man.
gonna take my daughter to eat when I go get her.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
Last
thank you.
question.
Appreciate y'all.
We sign our table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, man.
thank you very much and have a great day and thanks for watching.
Salute.
Yeah.